France is collapsing because of pension problems. As the country teeters on the edge of civil unrest, Macron's verdict seems to echo a dark feeling in the country. France's demons are back and seem to stalk the famous land. This started in January 2023, with more than 1 million people protesting in the streets of France. This was the largest protest the country had seen in years, and it resulted in a number of people refusing to show up for work, forcing the Paris metro system, schools, and other public facilities to shut down. In February and March, the number worsened as more than 1 million came out to protest, causing even more disruptions. France is currently the epicenter of the rioting. So what are the main issues as we speak, and will matters get better for Macron, or will they be worse? The catalyst to the unrest is President Macron's proposed pension reform that will raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. This would mean that the French workers will have to work for an extra 2 years to get a government-funded pension. The pension has made the Macron regime extremely disliked, with 70% of the voters disapproving of him. Despite his popularity going down and riots rising, Macron is still refusing to back down. Macron further pulled the vote and used special constitutional power to force the plan. This only led to more chaos. However, the problems they're facing are not unique. The most advanced economies are facing demographic crises with decreasing fertility rates and rapidly aging populations. This puts a rapid strain on the pension system into a situation that pension will become more of a pipe dream at the end of the decade. France spent 400 billion euros, equivalent to 14% of its GDP, on the payment of pensions. France has one of the most generous pension systems, with retirees making 50% of their 25 highest earning years. France has pride in providing the best benefits to retired people, allowing the elderly to live well. French pension system is funded by payroll taxes every month. This means 7% is deducted from workers' paychecks, and the employer has to pay another 10% on top of that for a total of 17%. In addition, the employer is liable for healthcare taxes, unemployment insurance, and a few other miscellaneous taxes. If you put it all together, the French payroll taxes represent 24% of gross wages, which is one of the highest rates in any developed country. High taxation occurs in France. The high taxes make it hard to hire French workers, which makes the economy uncompetitive on the global stage. All this has contributed to stagnant economic growth over the past decade and high unemployment, which has remained above 8% since 2008. In 2017, Emmanuel Macron wanted to make a change. His promises to the country were to help reform the country's economic system and make France competitive with other economies. Part of this entailed overhauling the country's overly generous pension system. In 2019, the Macron administration unveiled a pension reform bill, and the bill aimed to do just that. Furthermore, one of the key aspects of the reform bill was raising retirement ages from 62 to 64 in order to reduce costs. The French people were not happy with the pension reform. This led to labor unions organizing strikes that numbered 800,000 across the country in 2020. During the pandemic, the economy was down and pension plans were put on hold. The last thing that the government needed was chaos in these trying times. In the year 2022, Emmanuel Macron was re-elected for a second term. Macron felt that he had the political mandate to resurrect his pension reform, not forgetting he had been wanting to do this for years. The terms of the pension reform produced the same result as his failed attempt back in 2019. The goal of the pension system was to raise the retirement age. However, France's economic situation was failing. The global energy crisis pushed inflation up to 40-year highs across the Eurozone, including France. This had the effect of decreasing the standard of living for working-class people. The last thing people wanted was a pension reform that would affect the benefit to the elderly. When the pension was announced in January 2023, over 1 million French people were angry and protested on the streets. The protests turned violent as some would throw heavy garbage cans at security forces. Despite the violence of the protests and the resulting disruption of public services, the majority of the population supports them. These pension reforms will be implemented gradually through 2027 and 2030, respectively. The reforms would bring a sudden end to many so-called regimes with different requirement ages for different professions, including railway and electricity. However, the low retirement ages would be retained for certain categories of workers such as firefighters and police. Furthermore, the government would also increase the guaranteed minimum pension for low-income workers to 85% of net minimum wage. The government argues that these changes are necessary to ensure that the pension system prevents a major financial deficit in the future as the French population continues to get older. This new system would also bring France in line with the rest of Western Europe. Their pension age is generally between 65 and 67. However, this doesn't mean that the French people are going to like it. The polling suggests that some 2/3 of the French public oppose these reforms, which leads to the strikes. In fact, France's 8 main trade union bodies have been unusually united, and there have been multiple delays of national action in the country. In mid-March 2023, the Conservatives-dominated Senate voted through the reforms by 195 votes to 112, moving them to a final decisive vote in the National Assembly, which was due to take place on March 16th. This vote is always going to be tough for the government. President Macron lost his majority last year, and the two largest opposition groups, the left-wing NUPES Alliance and the far-right National Rally, were both opposed to the government's proposal. So despite receiving Senate approval, it looks unlikely it was going to progress further. So when it became clear that the government lacked the majority, Elizabeth Borne announced that she would trigger Article 49.3 of the French Constitution to force through the bill. This did not go well with the opposition, who sang the national anthem in the assembly to prevent her from announcing the declarations. So what is Article 49.3? Well, it's an article that basically allows the government to run any bill into a no-confidence vote. Essentially, this means that a government can force legislation through without a vote. However, in return, the opposition lawmakers will have 24 hours to file a no-confidence motion in the government. This is a risky move by the government, and that's because the opposition and the public have reacted furiously to its implementation. Marine Le Pen describes this as a total failure. Furthermore, the Communist Party leaders claimed that the parliament had been ridiculed and humiliated. Almost immediately after the announcement, riots kicked off across France, including near the National Assembly. According to the polling, 80% think this move was a mistake. In 2000, the French government set up the Pensions Orientation Council. The job of the council is to monitor the pension system. In 2022, they conducted an analysis, and the results were not pleasing. It says that the situation will deteriorate significantly going forward. They have a few different scenarios based on labor productivity growth. If labor increases, so will the wages, which will increase the level of contributions to the pension fund. In all scenarios, the pension system will start running into a deficit in 2024. In the most optimistic scenario of 1.6 annual productivity growth, the deficit will turn into a surplus around 2060 as wages increase in the most pessimistic scenario of 0.7 productivity growth. The deficit will continue to expand until it eventually reaches 1.8% of GDP by 2068. Productivity growth in France has been steadily decreasing for the past 50 years. In the 1960s, it was growing to around 5% per year. By 2010, it decreased to around 1% per year. And it's not just France. Most advanced economies have experienced similar declines. If we take the 1% productivity growth scenario, the French pension system will start running a deficit next year. The deficit will steadily increase to 1% of GDP by 2040. This would result in the government coming up with an additional $30 billion. The payroll taxes will have to rise, and France is known for one of the highest payroll tax burdens. This will make the French economy even less competitive on the global stage. We now see France's pension system is unsustainable. Fertility and high expectancy are other factors in pension problems. France already has one of the highest life expectancies in the world. French women live to an average age of 87 years, while men have an average age of 83 years. If they retire at the age of 60, this means their retirement is 22 to 27 years long. In 2070, the retirement length in France is expected to increase to 31 years for women and 29 for men. This is a major disaster in France because the longer the retirement, the greater expenses for the pension system. At the same time, the low birth rate will mean fewer people contributing to the pension system. Currently, in 2023, 29 million French workers are contributing to the system, and 17 million retirees are collecting and enjoying the benefits. Over the coming years, the number of contributors is expected to decrease and the number of retirees to increase. Macron plans to change the retirement age by 2 years. This will lead to a decrease in the number of retirees and an increase in the number of contributors. While the reforms are unpopular, they are to prevent the system from going bankrupt. However, the French protesters can't seem to handle the truth. Instead, they result in causing chaos in the streets of Paris. France is not the only country that will soon be affected by the pension crisis. Birth rates in all developed countries seem to decline and have been below replacement since 1990. Furthermore, the population above 65 is steadily increasing. In the case of France, only 13% of the population was above 65 in 1970. Now, the numbers hit 21%. The main reason is that many working women would rather advance their careers than start families as they gain more economic independence. Because of the rise in career-oriented individuals, the percentage of people living alone has skyrocketed. So even if the change is unpopular, there is a call for change. If French protests keep causing trouble in the streets of Paris, the government may have to look to abandon the reform, and this would merely put off the inevitable. So what is next for France and other developed countries? Only time will tell.